evening, everybody, and welcome to, is this number 2 or number 3 in the webinar series, Robin?
Number 3.
Number 3, awesome. So thank you everyone for showing up. I'm Skyla, and I am the chair of the Black-Footed Ferret Committee at the AFA, and we have a really special treat for you all tonight. My friend Travis Leveri, who's the executive director and the chief wildlife biologist at Prairie Wildlife Research, is going to do a Q&A with us. I just want to tell you a little bit about my friend Travis. He has a BS and a master's degree from the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point. In 2023, he got his PhD from Colorado State. He is listed as co-author of well over 100 research papers on black-footed ferrets, prairie dogs, and a whole spectrum of topics relating to the prairie ecosystem and conservation. He and Prairie Wildlife Research have partnered with both federal and state agencies, universities, private landowners in the U.S., as well as agencies in Canada and Mexico to provide support, education, and insight on prairie conservation, in particular the black-footed ferret. He's presented at international conferences, and Prairie Wildlife Research's work has been featured in documentaries like Return of the Prairie Bandit, national news outlets like The Atlantic, and out on the prairie, he has hosted celebrities as diverse as Jane Goodall and Miss South Dakota overnight on the grasslands of the Kanawha Basin in South Dakota. This region, which is part of the Buffalo Gap National Grasslands, is widely considered to be the most successful site of black-footed ferret reintroduction, and that is due in no small part to efforts of Travis and the folks who work with him. He recently hired, and we're glad to welcome a technician, Nicole, for PWR, April Leveri. He's also been assisted by the U.S. Forest Service, National Parks people, a plethora of grad students and volunteers like me. Kits, wild-born in that area, have been captured and reintroduced to new sites in multiple states. So the fate of the black-footed ferret has always been closely linked to that of the prairie dog. And just as the black-footed ferret depends on prairie dogs as their primary food source, they are both vulnerable to the deadly effects of sylvatic plague, also known as bubonic plague. And this is something that everybody involved in conservation in that area with prairie dogs and black-footed ferrets has had to deal with. As unchecked climate change causes extended periods of drought and new weather patterns, there's a decreasing amount of forage available to prairie dogs, and their declining numbers cause black-footed ferret populations to decrease as well. And I just want to make a brief note here that when government funding is cut for whatever reason, conservation and taking care of these animals is directly affected. And it seems, see, so much work, so many people have put so much work into bringing this animal back from literally the edge of extinction. And somebody comes in and thinks they're trimming the fat, and essential personnel lose jobs and lose a lifetime's work. So whenever you vote, you just need to think about the interconnectedness of all things. And if you care about ferrets, think about how funding works. And that's all I'll say about that. But I do want to say that because Travis and April are longtime ferret parents, they're in a unique position for us to be able to compare both these mustelid cousins and gain insights into both. And with that, I will let Travis loose. Thank you.
Let me loose. Thank you, Skyla. Thank you, Robin. And thank you to all of you who have sent in questions ahead of time. And we are going to work on those questions tonight. We'll have some time towards the end. Let me see if I can get this into the mode, I'm sorry, that I think I want it to be in. There we go, the side-by-side mode. Okay, hopefully you are seeing my screen. I will put it in presenter mode. And here we go. So, as Skyla said, I'm Travis Laduri, Prairie Wildlife Research. I've been working with black-footed ferrets for 30 years now. Pretty much all my adult life, I had a lot more hair when I started working with black-footed ferrets. I'm going to keep going no matter how much hair I have. So thank you for sending in your questions. So let's start. Orson, with such a small population discovered in the wild, we had 18 ferrets left at one point in time. What strategies are used for breeding the few remaining black-footed ferrets? Great question. So those last 18 that came into the captive breeding centers from Meeteetse, Wyoming, was it. That's the entire population in the whole world in the late 1980s. So those were all highly related species, highly related animals already. So they carefully breed them, pairing certain ones with certain ones to try to maintain.
Travis,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I cannot see your screen. I'm not sure if I'm the only one. Mine is just blank.
Okay. Can anybody else see the screen?
Yes.
So it's just me?
Uh-oh.
I can.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't know why. I'll figure it out.
Okay. And if anybody else can't see the screen, please speak up. All right, we're getting some thumbs up here, so I think we're mostly good on people seeing the screen, which is great. So the black-footed ferret captive breeding, which occurs at 5 zoos and 1 breeding center, is really carefully managed to maintain what little genetic diversity we already had. And that's been for 30 plus years now, breeding in captivity, and we've maintained about 85% of what was originally there. That being said, we need more genetic diversity. So where are we going to get it? It might come from clones. Wait a minute, clones. So Bonnie and Courtney both asked, have I had anything to do with the cloning project? And can I talk a little bit about the cloning program? So if you hadn't heard, there has been a clone made of black-footed ferrets. Here's a picture of Antonia at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute. This is in Front Royal, Virginia, where she is one of the clones of black-footed ferrets. As I just mentioned, all black-footed ferrets come from one small population of only about 7 related individuals. And of those 18, a couple of them are no longer represented in the current population. So at the San Diego Frozen Zoo, there actually is a couple samples from black-footed ferrets from the 1980s that are no longer part of the population represented genetically. So they were able to take some of those genetics, those cells from those frozen black-footed ferrets and clone them. How do you clone a black-footed ferret? This is all pretty much new technology they developed for this occasion, and they actually used domestic ferrets as part of this. So they used eggs from domestic ferrets, and because you have obviously a larger population of domestic ferrets to get eggs from, you take out the basically the nucleus of that egg and take the nucleus from a black-footed ferret cell and pop that in there. And I'm really making this simplified. This is pretty complex, and this is not something I'm directly involved in that part of it. And so therefore you have this egg, which is actually a domestic ferret egg that contains the DNA of a black-footed ferret. And then they actually take this egg and implant it inside of a domestic ferret, and then a domestic ferret gives birth to a black-footed ferret. So Elizabeth Ann was the first black-footed ferret born from a domestic ferret. Wonderful, excellent. And then she actually was part of the domestic ferrets She actually had a litter of other domestic ferrets with her. Elizabeth Ann grew up with domestic ferrets and eventually was kind of weaned off and brought into the black-footed ferret world, I guess you'd call it. So this isn't a perfect process because you get some domestic ferret genetic material that comes through that. How does that come through? Well, what do you get from your mom? I'm talking genetically. You get half of your mom's DNA and half of your father's DNA recombined, but you get all of your mom's mitochondrial DNA. Now, mitochondrial DNA is just a very small portion of the genome, about 16,000 base pairs out of 3 billion base pairs, so a really tiny amount. However, that is still represented as a small amount of domestic ferret genetic material that is now in black-footed ferrets. So we do have to consider how we deal with this from a legal standpoint. Is it truly a 100% pure black-footed ferret? At this point, it really technically is not. It's a 99.999999999% pure black-footed ferret with a little bit of domestic ferret mitochondrial DNA. Does that matter? We don't really know at this point in time, but there are ways for us to think about how we can get that resolved in the future. One of the ways would be that, so like Elizabeth Ann, she didn't give birth, but Antonia did give birth. Her sons, if they breed, would carry half of her genetic material, but would not pass on her mitochondrial DNA. So they can use then the males from the clones to kind of reduce the mitochondrial DNA. So our next steps with the cloning, and this is more where I've been involved in this part and more of the planning of how to evaluate the fitness of the clones. Are they truly black-footed ferrets in terms of behavior, reproduction? When we get to putting them out into the wild, are they going to survive and act like wild black-footed ferrets the way that we need them to? So we're trying to develop a plan on how we incorporate those black-footed ferret clones and their offspring into the captive breeding population, and then eventually into the wild reintroduced populations. We're also investigating ways to add more genetic diversity to black-footed ferrets. There's a plethora of genetic tools available these days where we might be able to go back and take, say, like museum specimens, like this one here from the Museum of Southwestern Biology, and take a small bone sample or even a hair sample off of that, sequence that genome and see what diversity it had that the current ferrets do not have, and then use something like CRISPR to go in and actually edit the genome of black-footed ferrets to add diversity in. So there's some really interesting, exciting tools on the horizon that could be used for black-footed ferret genetic diversity. A great question came from Lumi. What is the gestation period for a black-footed ferret? It's actually 42, 43 days, the same exact period as it is for a domestic ferret. These are really closely related species, and so they really have, again, we just talked about cloning and how they can even give birth to their own cross species and things like that. So here's a sequence of pictures of black-footed ferrets after they are born, and they grow pretty quickly. I'm sure for those of you who raise domestic ferrets, you have the same sequence of they grow pretty fast, and by 3-4 months they are fully adult size and ready to go. So they're born tiny, about the size of your pinky finger, the top of your pinky finger, blind and hairless and helpless, and within 30 to 60 days they are getting all of their markings, their eyes and ears are open, and they're starting to move around a little bit. And then again, by 90 days of age, they are rambunctious teenagers who are driving their mom nuts. And by 120 days, 4 months old, they are, at least black-footed ferrets, are ready to go out the door. So Erica asks, could a black-footed ferret and a domestic ferret breed? They actually could. And so some folks might ask, does this mean they are actually the same species? Not really, because the domestic ferrets are descended from European ferrets, which do still exist out in the wild, but they've been separated from habitat and by times periods for a long, long time. So they really are different species, even though they can't interbreed, as well as the Siberian ferret, which still exists in the steppes of Asia. However, as we talked about with the mitochondrial DNA, any mixing of those species would then compromise the purity of that. And under the Endangered Species Act, under law, that would no longer be considered an endangered black-footed ferret. Courtney asks about the behavior of black-footed ferrets. So behaviorally, what are the main similarities and differences of black-footed ferrets and domesticated ferrets? Are black-footed ferrets solitary or social? If they're social, do they stay with their families? So the similarities, and there's quite a few as I started to really think about the behaviors of this for black-footed ferrets and domestic ferrets. And again, April and I have our own ferrets here at home, so I get to see a lot of this up close and personal with the domestic ferrets. They sleep a lot. Black-footed ferrets spend the vast majority of their life underground. And so I don't get to see them sleeping all the time, but they're down there for the most part sleeping. Maybe a little bit of maintenance in terms of licking their fur and cleaning themselves off, a little bit of eating, things like that. But otherwise, they are downstairs sleeping. Similar to domestic ferrets, when they wake up, sometimes they get that little shiver. They'll certainly yawn quite a bit. They love fitting into tight spaces. Prairie dog burrows, which is the habitat for black-footed ferrets, are about yay big around, and they can turn themselves right around in those. So just like domestic ferrets, they are really comfortable and not claustrophobic for sure. When they have the opportunity to dig, I'm sure that you guys can tell us plenty of stories about how your ferret got into your potted plants and destroyed those. Black-footed ferrets can dig. They usually don't dig their own burrows. They usually take over the prairie dog burrows that they kill the prairie dogs from, but they will sometimes modify those burrows by digging them out. Black-footed ferrets are mostly active at night. We do occasionally see them in the morning or sometimes around sunset, but they're mostly active at night. I'm sure for those of you who wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to hear that noise that crashed out of your ferret room, you know that your ferrets are active at night as well. As you can see from this picture here, this is from the Captive Breeding Center in Colorado. They can be very playful, especially as kits. So certainly when they're kits and they're together as a litter, they're going to practice those hunting behaviors. They're going to do a lot of wrestling. We even see them doing what we call it the ferret happy dance. You guys call it the weasel war dance. Very similar thing, bouncing around and throwing their head from side to side, tail flared out. That is a pretty common thing for ferret kits to do that kind of wrestling when they're certainly together as a litter. So what are some of the differences? And I'm talking about just behaviorally. And really there's not as many that I could come up with. And first of all, black-footed ferrets are highly territorial. So they are not tolerant of any other adults. Once in a while, an adult female might be tolerant of her 1-year-old daughter who is nearby in her territory, but otherwise they will sometimes injure each other in defending their territory. Now, I know that sometimes pet ferrets will also get into squabbles and fights, but this is pretty serious stuff when it comes to black-footed ferrets. Black-footed ferrets don't vocalize very often, and I've never heard them made like the duking sound like you'd hear off of a pet ferret. We have a pet ferret here at home, Bailey, that she's been our most vocal ferret. And I'm sorry, Bailey Francesca is her name. And one of our joys is every night trying to scratch her on certain spots of her body, and then she goes into duking right away. I've never heard that in a black-footed ferret, but we know they can make some vocalizations. When a mother has young, she will make some vocalizations to the young kits. And then sometimes when they're scared or are really agitated, they can kind of bark, chatter, hiss, somewhat similar to domestic ferrets, but much, much louder and very startling sometimes. Alan asks, how far under the ground do prairie dog burrows go, and how far do the ferrets go? So the prairie dogs dig the burrows, and that's a picture of a black-footed ferret in a prairie dog burrow in Kanawha Basin. That burrow can go down as deep as 15 feet. it can be connected to other burrows as far as 100 feet away. So these burrow systems can be quite extensive. And so thinking about a black-footed ferret out in the wild, that ecosystem, that environment underground maintains a stable temperature and humidity year-round. So it's actually a pretty great environment for a black-footed ferret to be just a couple feet underground, and the temperature is going to be 55, 60 degrees year-round, stable humidity. And so we don't see them either have a real bushy coat. They actually have a pretty thin fur layer on black-footed ferrets, and when they do molt and change their coat once a year, it looks exactly the same, and it's about the same length, so we don't get that kind of fuzzier look to them at all. Ayla asks, what is a black-footed ferret's favorite toy? Well, in the wild, they don't really have toys to play with, than maybe prairie dogs and their prey that they might prey upon. But in captivity, they do enrichment with black-footed ferrets. And so here's some great examples of what they do in the captive breeding center with black-footed ferrets. And I know that for most of you, number 4 right there on the bottom right, a ferret in a bag, that's the most probably common thing. That's a universal thing for just any ferrets, whether it's black-footed ferrets or domestic ferrets. Whenever April wants to bring home gifts for the ferrets, I usually take the bag and give the bag to the ferrets, and that's what they play with. And they don't care about the toys that she buys for them, and I'm sure you're used to that as well. They get hidden under the couch. You can see just some certain things that make noise, crinkly things they can sometimes kind of push around, like those balls there. So those are kind of the favorite toys in captivity that they give them for enrichment. In the wild, again, they don't have toys for enrichment, but what do they eat? They eat prairie dogs. The vast majority of their diet is prairie dogs. They do eat mice, maybe small birds and small rabbits that they capture that are on prairie dog colonies. So they don't leave the prairie dog colony to hunt. They live on the prairie dog colony and are only eating things they find in the prairie dog colony. And the vast majority of that is prairie dogs. People like snacks. We have some evidence that female black-footed ferrets, when they have young kits, a litter, will actually prefer to eat small prairie dog pups. So they're probably the easiest thing to kill, and they're easy to consume and things like that. So we find that there are kind of some preferences at certain times of the year. This picture on the left here, I wanted to show that this was something we came across out in the wild. We had seen a ferret right near this spot, and as we approached, he ran back to a burrow. But this ferret had killed a prairie dog, and the prairie dog there is on the left, laid it on its back, and almost like a doctor or a surgeon, removed the intestines, laid them off to the side, and then started to eat the prairie dog from the intestines, from the organs inside. We have some evidence that they like to eat the organs, the liver, the heart, things like that are really high in nutrients. They are also very moist. So there is no standing water out in the prairie. So black-footed ferrets don't drink water. So they get all their metabolic water. Everything that they consume comes from prairie dogs. So great question for both Christy and Earl about black-footed ferret diet. And Joan asks about prairie dogs. What measures are being taken to secure prairie dog availability? And what can be done to secure a secondary food source, such as rabbits or grouse, etc.? So prairie dogs, if many of you have not been out west, are a very controversial species. But we need prairie dogs for black-footed ferrets. A lot of ranchers don't like prairie dogs, and they're politically a difficult species for politicians to support sometimes. So it's hard to have large areas of prairie dogs where we can have black-footed ferrets. Some measures are being taken. We're trying landowner incentives. We're trying to just build up larger blocks of land in order to have more prairie dogs. The area that we work in Kanawha Basin Badlands, that's National Park and U.S. Forest Service lands. As far as having secondary food sources, as I just mentioned before, we only find them on prairie dog colonies. So if there's rabbits or mice on those prairie dog colonies, then the ferrets might prey upon those and eat those. But they're not going to go off the colonies to search for rabbits or grouse or other species like that. So we can't really teach them to eat a different species at this point in time. It's way too late on the evolutionary time scale to do that. Otherwise, that'd be a great solution to trying to find more habitat for them. Bonnie asks, do we collaborate with all the prairie dog organizations? Because they do a lot of great work with prairie dogs, and we need prairie dogs in order to have black-footed ferrets. Absolutely, we do. A lot of prairie dog organizations out there do a great job of prairie dog conservation. We work very closely with one called the Prairie Dog Coalition, as well as the Humane World for Animals, used to be HSUS. They do a lot of great prairie dog work in trying to restore prairie dog populations and prevent plague. We'll talk about plague here in a moment in those populations. So we are, just like black-footed ferrets and prairie dogs are linked, so are the biologists, and that we are working together and treating this as an ecosystem. If we can have healthy prairie dog populations, we'll have healthy black-footed ferret populations. Angus asks about teeth. He once read that black-footed ferrets have the largest canine tooth to skull ratio of any living mammal. Is that true? If so, this remains my favorite fact ever. He also asks about bite force. So I have heard this about the largest canine tooth to skull ratio of any living mammal. It sounds like a great story. I don't think it's quite exactly true. I would say that hypercarnivores, which is what a black-footed ferret is, a carnivore that eats more than 75% of their diet consists of meat, is going to have a high skull to tooth ratio. So this is a replica black-footed ferret skull, and this is a mink skull. You can see that they look very similar, and I will try to get the tooth size up there for both of those species. So I would say that mustelids in general, ferrets, mink, weasels, probably have a high canine tooth to skull ratio. And again, that might depend upon what you're measuring and where you're measuring it. But in general, carnivores need those big teeth to really do some damage out there. Looking at this research paper from 2018, where they looked at multiple species. Again, hypercarnivores are the red dot there. You can see the bite force. It's kind of all over the scale there. But it goes also along with hypocarnivores, aquatic carnivores, and even some herbivores in there. So it's not necessarily about bite force, but perhaps the most important part of this are the carnassial shearing teeth. And so for a ferret, those are going to be the upper premolar and lower molars, and those are going to come together like a scissors. Let's see if I can get this mink skull to do that. There we go. Like a scissors, and cut right through that bone. That's what does most of the work. Those canine teeth are mostly for grabbing. That's really the function of those canine teeth, is just for grabbing the prey and hanging on to it. And for the case of black-footed ferrets, for suffocating the prairie dog. That picture on the lower left there, that is a bite that I suffered from a black-footed ferret. You can see that it put a pretty good puncture hole in the webbing of my hand there. It got infected, as well as put a few more bite marks up around that. So yes, those teeth are sharp. Let me get back to, there we go. Bob asks, what is the average lifespan of black-footed ferrets living in the wild? Great question, Bob. And this is something that's really important, I think, for domestic ferret owners to understand. Black-footed ferrets in the wild live about 1.5 to 2 years on average. In my 30 years of doing this, I've had 2 ferrets make it to 5 years old, and this is a picture of one of them. We call her the old girl. She lived to be 5 years old. She had a litter every year, and there was one other one that lived to 5 years. The oldest male I've had was 4 years old, but the vast majority of the population lives a year or 2 at best. If you get in one breeding season in the wild as a black-footed ferret, you're doing pretty good, because you are having to hunt for food, having to watch out for predators, and those are things that are just hard to do, as well as look out for disease. Skylar mentioned plague, and again, we're going to talk more about plague here in a second. So thinking about then ferret age and things like that, compared to domestic ferrets, do black-footed ferrets get the insulinomas and other adrenal disease and other cancers that we see in Marshall's ferrets? Sean and Paul brought up these great questions about diseases that we see in domestic ferrets. And certainly these things could happen to black-footed ferrets. In the captive breeding centers, they certainly document some ferrets dying simply of old age that tends to be of one of these cancerous type diseases. However, just like in humans, some cancers are inherited, and some of these cancers with pet ferrets could be inherited as well. But most cancers are simply just DNA mutations that cause cells to grow uncontrollably, and age is a factor. In humans, the longer you live, the more likely you are to get cancer. And so we have this great benefit that we're able to keep our pet ferrets alive for a long time compared to what their body is physiologically capable of really doing. So that's what happens sometimes with these insulinomas and things like that are taken on our pet ferrets. So we shouldn't feel too bad. We should still keep looking for solutions and cures to these things, but we shouldn't feel too bad about our pet ferrets living to be 5 years old, because again, those little bodies are not designed to live that long in the wild. Nikki asked some questions about conservation. What is the process used for releasing black-footed ferrets into the wild? Great question. So here is a picture of a preconditioning pen in Colorado where that ferret, which was born inside in captivity, is being prepared to be released into the wild. So at about 90 days of age, or maybe even a little earlier sometimes, they get put in these outdoor pens, which have these quasi-natural burrows, and even have live prairie dogs in there where they get to stay kind of out in the quote-unquote wild and get to learn to be a black-footed ferret. So we call this process preconditioning. Every ferret that is released today from the captive breeding centers goes through this preconditioning process, and it has been shown to increase survivorship tenfold in the wild compared to those that did not receive preconditioning treatment. So that is our main goal for preparing black-footed ferrets for release into the wild. Laura asks about vaccinations. What vaccinations do black-footed ferret get, and if so, which ones do they get? Pretty similar to domestic ferrets. They're susceptible to canine distemper. Now, we cannot use a modified live vaccine in black-footed ferrets. It will actually give them distemper and they will die of it. So we are very limited in what vaccines we can use. So we use the PureVax ferret distemper vaccine. It works very well for black-footed ferrets, and we're able to get a supply of it. And so every ferret that comes out of captivity gets 2 shots, a primary and a booster of distemper vaccine. In the wild, I try to give them the wild-born kits, PureVax ferret distemper vaccine as well. And then we also in the wild give them plague vaccine, actually in captivity as well. So that's to protect them against plague. And that's a special vaccine we get through the U.S. Army and other sources like that. It's not something you can go to Walgreens or buy, and you can't get it from your veterinarian. Some ferrets that are released into the wild are required to have rabies in certain states. So in certain areas, like when you go and release ferrets into Montana, the state of Montana requires they be vaccinated against rabies. So they will get the MRAB3 vaccination. So that's just in the captive ferrets being released into the wild. We don't vaccinate the wild ferrets against rabies. We don't have any evidence that it's been a problem in wild ferret populations. Carl asks, is the plague really a thing out in the prairie? And I wish I could tell you otherwise, but it really is a thing out in the prairie, and it can be devastating. This is our largest biological threat to black-footed ferrets. And so what I've got in this picture are dead prairie dogs we picked up in 2024 in South Dakota in Kanata Basin Badlands, where we had a massive plague outbreak that we had to suppress. So it took out lots of prairie dogs. It took out lots of black-footed ferrets and habitat. And so this is our biggest biological threat that we have to fight. So plague is transmitted by fleas. And so that's kind of our main vector that we're trying to control. So we put an insecticide dust down into the prairie dog burrows to kill the fleas down there. We're also working on bait that's distributed that the prairie dogs can eat that will then kill the fleas on them. And then we'll be shedding their feces and also control the larval fleas down the prairie dog burrows. So we're looking at ways that we can efficiently, effectively, and at a low environmental impact kill fleas in the environment. Lee asks, do I personally get to physically engage with the Blackfoot ferrets I have, or do I remain detached from them when providing medical care? I'm just as human as anybody here. So I certainly take my personal moments to enjoy what I do. No doubt about that. But I try to remain somewhat detached in that these are wild animals. These are not my pets at home. And so I'm not going to treat them like that. I'm not going to pet them and stroke them or whatever when I have them knocked out. You could not do it when they are awake. Yes, I certainly enjoy those moments when I get to handle them, and I treasure that type of thing. But I try to remain somewhat scientifically detached in that these are wild animals. They're going to live and die. I'm going to do my best to help them not die and to live as long as they can, to reproduce as much as they can. And that's kind of, I have to apply the best science I can to those problems. Lisa asks, what is the best way for us, domestic ferret owners, to support your program? Number one, be a member of the AFA. Support the AFA. Pay your dues. Pay them every year. Be a part of the Black-footed ferret team on the AFA. Go to the shows. Support the AFA. AFA has been critical in supporting Black-footed ferrets all along, and they support our work out in the wild, and I'm so grateful for that. So number one, be part of the AFA. Number two, you can support Black-footed ferret recovery directly through our website. You can go to our website. We have a donate button there, and you can take you to a PayPal link. You do not need an actual PayPal account, and it actually won't take any fees out of the donation as well. So that's another way you can directly donate to us. Where does that money go? It goes to on the ground. It puts us out in the field. That's where we need to see our litigation per se. I mean, we'll certainly try to do education the best that we can, but we are biologists that are doing the on-the-ground work to save Black-footed ferret, to put out on the upper right there, to put out those what we call fipronil bits that the prairie dogs can eat to prevent fleas on them. We're out there monitoring Black-footed ferrets with our team disease the populations to move them within the larger area so we can make sure that they're getting some kind of at least genetic diversity within our populations. So that's where your dollars are going, is they're going right to the ground for boots in the ground for Black-footed ferrets. We also have a bonfire store that you can go to and actually buy merchandise. Skyla mentioned our new technician Nicole. She's also got this great graphic arts kick in her that she loves to make things about Black-footed ferrets and other prairie species. So go check out our bonfire store, and you can buy t-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, all kinds of things there as well. Girl Scouts, yes, buy Girl Scout cookies. In 2026, the animal mascot for the Girl Scouts is the Black-footed ferret. And so they chose this, and now we don't get cookie money directly, but the Girl Scouts themselves can choose where some of the proceeds from their cookie sales go. And so they can choose to send some of that to Black-footed ferret recovery. So this is a really exciting thing that we are really, the Black-footed ferrets are really onto. So yes, buy your Girl Scout cookies, and when you do, tell them that you have a pet ferret and you know about Black-footed ferrets. I think that's one of the most powerful things that you can do as a pet ferret owner that doesn't cost you a thing, is talk about your ferrets. And I know a lot of you do already, but tell them about Black-footed ferrets. Because one of our biggest challenges as Black-footed ferret biologists is when you say the word ferret, everybody automatically thinks of pet ferrets. Oh yeah, my cousin's got one of those black-footed ferrets. Well, it may be a black-footed, maybe a ferret, and may have black feet, but it's not a black-footed ferret. It's actually a pet ferret. That's your opportunity to educate them on what your ferret is and what it is not. It is not a black-footed ferret. Did you know that there's a native ferret to North America and that you can do something to help it? That's what you can do with your part for ferrets. Go visit your zoos. Zoos are a tremendous part of black-footed ferret conservation. Without the Louisville Zoo, Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, Phoenix Zoo, Smithsonian, that's part of the National Zoo, as well as Toronto Zoo, Omaha Henry Doyle Zoo used to be part of the program. Those are the ones that breed black-footed ferrets in captivity for release out into the wild. They do that on their own dime. They're not paid. Like the Louisville Zoo is a city-operated zoo. Cheyenne Mountain Zoo is a nonprofit zoo. These zoos are paying for captive breeding out of their own budgets. The Smithsonian Conservation Foundation, that is a government-run zoo, so that, as Skyla mentioned, when federal budgets get cut, that's one of those that could be cut there. But support your zoos. Support the zoos that just have black-footed ferrets on display, and there are quite a few. This map, I would suggest you find out ahead of time before you go to the zoo to make sure that their ferret is there on display. But New Zoo in Green Bay, Hutchinson, Kansas. Look at all, there's 6 zoos in Kansas alone that have display black-footed ferret, a live black-footed ferret for you to go see. The Dakota Zoo, there's actually a ferret in their logo. Awesome. Go support your zoos. They are on the front lines of conservation and recovery, and we do a lot of work with the zoos, and so they're a really important part of this program. And that's the end of the submitted questions. Now we have time, I hope, for some live questions.
Okay, let's see. We're waiting for our tech people to turn on the cameras and microphones. And by the way, I'm Robin Landis. I'm the education director for the American Ferret Association, and I hope you all enjoyed those slides and Travis's commentary as much as I did. I learned a lot. So as soon as we get that
I will
turned
make
on.
one more plug.
It's on. It's an option now.
I'm going to make one more plug for a great book that just came out, and I helped her with some of it too, and proof checking, and if it's backwards, I'm sorry. Black-Footed Ferrets by Elaine Miller Bond. It just came out. It's available on Amazon and other sources. It is designed for all ages and has some fantastic photographs that I was really impressed with how she really got some great photographs, but really also does some, talking about conservation, prairie dogs, work out in the field, things like that. So it's really designed for everybody, for all ages. I would encourage you to go check it out.
So can I ask the first impromptu question? Is it possible to volunteer with this program?
It is. I generally say you need about 2 weeks in a 4-wheel drive pickup truck, and you need to pay for your own hotel room and a bunch of other things. It is a remote area to get out there, and it's staying up all night long, being able to navigate at night. So we don't take a lot of volunteers. I usually really try to vet the volunteers before, make sure that this is intense. Yep.
Okay. So I understand the Q&A is open. If you have questions and you want to drop those in there, we can share those. Is that
also, Robin, just so you see, I saw somebody raise their hand, Marissa. Yep. So it looks like Marissa has a question. So if we can unmute Marissa.
Yeah, thank you. Are you guys able to hear me? I'm using my phone for the first time.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
I love this, by the way, all of this. I actually used to work for the AZA, and so I have the first privately owned cloning project, Ferret. So he's one of the domestic babies that was
Yep.
born out of the cloning, and he's really unique. He lives with my Marshall's rescue that I got from Bonnie, and so I was curious if you know anything about knowing more intricately than me the cloning process, if that could have affected his behavior, his genetics, anything like that. He's like a stallion of a ferret. He walks a mile a night. He's got a really big head. He's beautiful. But I was just curious if it, affected him in any way that you would know of.
I guess that's a great question, Marissa. I guess I can't think of any way it genetically would have carried through, because that embryo that they would have implanted into your ferret's mom would have been with the black-footed ferret DNA in it. And obviously your ferret was not one of those embryos, but she was already pregnant with other kits. However, yeah, I can't think of a way that would pass through, but maybe when they were younger and they were playing together, maybe some of that black-footed ferret came through and made him a little bit more robust and more of a fighter as a young kid. And he's grown up now as maybe thinking he's half black-footed ferret.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and that's a great point. I do think how he was raised at the Smithsonian Virginia lab definitely affected him for the better.
Yeah, great. And great to hear from AZA folks, too. For the folks you don't know, that's the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, which all those zoos I just mentioned are a member of are accredited by that organization, and that is the gold standard for zoos in the world.
And the black-footed ferret has the SAFE program.
Yes, it does.
Which AZA loves.
Yeah.
Travis, I have a question. It's Bonnie. So, and I forgot what I was going to ask. See? It happens. But I'm so glad to have that Marissa's on the call and that she has that baby. It's worked out really well for her.
I think Christopher Williams has his hand up. Do you want to? There we go.
Hi, Travis. I put my questions in the chat.
Oh, okay.
I'm Chris from Mustelid and Meerkat Memories on Facebook and YouTube.
I'm not seeing them in the meeting chat.
3 questions in the meeting chat.
I think he might be in the Facebook Live meeting chat.
Oh, okay.
Let me see if I can transcribe that over there. Let's see. Sure. Well, Chris,
I'm also in the Facebook and the Teams.
Oh, you are in the Teams. Okay. So I'm looking in chat and I do not see it. Would you mind just kind of verbalizing it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me comment on the live chat on Facebook, and I'll also read them out. Number 1, due to outdated science, domestic ferrets have been outlawed in California since 1933 due to their conflation with BFF. What is the most scientific argument to justify overturning that ban and getting domestic ferrets re-legalized there and anywhere else they're illegal?
Yeah, that's a great question, Christopher. And that's certainly something that is a travesty of justice in so many ways. And whenever I've talked to some folks from California with California Department of Fish and Game, and I've said to them, I've got a hard time getting our native ferret to live in the wild. What makes you think that a domestic ferret could live in a non-native habitat for that species? And that, I think, is a pretty simple argument to them that we can't even get our native ferret to survive in the wild as easily, and so. Justify overturning domestic Do you have another question, Christopher? Okay.
I know there's a in the Q&A, Ella Tesmer, do you want me to read that or do you want to unmute and ask?
Hi, it's Shyla. I can ask. I'm Shyla from Wisconsin, and I currently have two wonderful little girl domestic ferrets, and they're awesome. So this has been a great opportunity to listen in on this webinar. Travis, thank you. I was just wondering, you were talking about the process for getting the captive-born ferrets into their outdoor pens. So I imagine they nurse from their mom for a while once they're born. And I was wondering what the process is for graduating them to hunting the prairie dogs in the outdoor pens from when they are first born. So in between mom and the outdoor pen, what do they eat? And how do you get them into hunting mode? Or do they just kind of naturally know what to do?
Yeah, and so great question. And so they're certainly, yes, give me nursing on mom throughout that earlier part of their development, and then as they become weaned towards meat, if they know that they're going to be targeted for release into the wild, they will start feeding those kits actual dead prairie dog in captivity, so they can at least start to imprint upon those, that eating meat like that. And if they don't have prairie dog available, they will use commercially available rodents, hamsters, things like that they can then use for that carnivore part of it. And when they get up to a certain age, they put them out in the pens, usually about maybe 60-ish days of age, maybe a little bit later than that. They'll start out with being in the pens without any live prairie dogs at first. So they'll supplementally feed them dead prairie dogs or hamsters or something like that in those pens, and kind of make that a gradual transition of meat that's supplied to you, and then eventually meat that you're gonna have to kill. And so it's kind of a gradual process that they try to gently lead those ferrets along with, and then they try to ensure that every ferret can and has killed a prairie dog before they get released into the wild. So that's kind of what you need to graduate from ferret school, is to kill a prairie dog.
Yeah, thank you. Can I ask a quick follow-up to that
Sure.
same question?
Yeah.
Have you ever found any that just can't make it on their own in the wild, that they just don't understand how to hunt?
And it's interesting because we do all this, and it certainly shows in the wild, and then sometimes you do get those ones that you're not quite sure, boy, this one seems like it's not going to get it, and then you release it, and you think to yourself, boy, that, we'll never see that one again. Sometimes those are the ones that end up surviving and reproducing. So I've kind of gotten over trying to predict, based on little behaviors and things like that, exactly which ones are going to make it. And so sometimes those ones are the ones that do just fine. So, maybe that release, that kick in the butt, that reality check,
Right.
all of a sudden kicks them into high gear.
Exactly. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. I see that Tim has his hand up. Are you ready to ask a question, Tim?
Sure thing. My question is, what would you say is the biggest benefit of increasing the numbers of black-footed ferrets in the wild? If you can narrow it down to a top one.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of benefits to whom, I guess.
I guess that's the question overall. It's my son's question. The environment, or
I was mainly thinking towards the environment.
For the environment
Okay.
overall.
Yeah. And so we think of black-footed ferrets as kind of an indicator species. If black-footed ferret populations are surviving and thriving out in the prairies, that means we have healthy prairie dog populations. Prairie dogs also provide habitat for swift fox, for burrowing owls, for ferruginous hawks, for mountain plovers, for a whole host of other species. So black-footed ferrets are kind of the flagship, the cute animal that represents the prairie dog ecosystem. So if we can restore black-footed ferrets, we're doing ecosystem restoration through black-footed ferrets, essentially. And having intact ecosystems is good for everybody.
Awesome.
All right, thank you.
Anybody-
That-
Yeah.
I
Are there
see
other
that.
questions?
Robin, I found Christopher's other questions here on Facebook. So
Okay.
I'm just, Chris, if it's okay, I'm just going to read this one out loud. Number 3, Christopher was asking, he said, he understands big fish versus small fish and big bird versus small bird in regards to smaller fish being eaten by sharks, songbirds being eaten by raptors. And as I now understand, there's a big weasel versus small weasel case to be made with badgers eating black-footed ferrets. Are there other cases of big weasel versus small weasel in the U.S. or worldwide? And would a wolverine eat a black-footed ferret if they were ever to meet?
Great question. So black-footed ferrets kind of are what we call a mesopredator. They're in the middle. There's predators above them and things below them. And what is above them is certainly badgers. And we have documented badgers killing black-footed ferrets. Most often when we see badgers near black-footed ferrets, the badgers are actually trying to steal the ferret's dead prairie dog. So we actually call them, they're kleptoparasites. They're stealing and they're not benefiting the ferret or not killing the ferret, but they're taking away the ferret food. Wolverines are the craziest bad mustelids out there. Luckily, they don't live anywhere near black-footed ferrets, but I think if they came across a black-footed ferret, it wouldn't even be a fight. So that's what ferrets have burrows for as well. They can escape down those prairie dog burrows and get away from something like a wolverine. A fight I wouldn't want to see.
Erica has a good question here. Erica, do you want to unmute and ask?
Erica.
Well, we can ask Erica's question
Yeah.
for her.
I'll ask. She wants to know, do you ever see albino or differently colored black-footed ferrets?
Very rarely. Let me see if I can quick dig up a picture. We had one ferret that I remember came in, this was in 2003, that had just less coloration on him. I'm going to quick try to find this picture for you and show you because he was really interesting looking. Otherwise, they pretty much look just like that all the time. Once in a while, you might get just some real subtle color shades of difference on something, but it's not very often. Okay, let me get this picture up here. Maybe. And let me see if I can share it. There we go. Can you see that picture? Yeah, so he had a really light mask on him. He was just kind of, and this was, just kind of an odd color. This was an adult male. And again, they don't change color coat at all in the winter, but this was the most unusual one I've ever seen. You'd almost call him like a cinnamon almost. And you will see sometimes these some white hairs in the toes occasionally, or on the bottoms of their feet, some white hairs, but generally it's almost always jet black on the feet, jet black tail tip, front feet, that mask, black nose, and a little bit, it's kind of these little umlauts they have over their eyes as well, these little white umlauts. But that's the most unusual one I've ever seen.
Very cool. I know Dawn Carter has questions too. Do you want to unmute Dawn and ask?
I do. Thank you. I joined a little late, so I apologize if these are a repetition, and you can tell me so and I won't be offended. I'm a huge science wonk, and I'm one that will sit in front of those cams at the zoos for hours, watching them play and interact, and it's just amazing. And thank you for the work you're doing. The first question I had is, I've heard there's research into creating some sort of a heritable immunity to sylvatic plague. Are we close to like a genetic vaccine that might be passed down to wild kits? And if so, are there any regulatory barriers for releasing genetically modified ferrets if that happens?
Those are great questions, and they're huge questions.
I know.
Yes, I do sit on the genomics committee for black-footed ferrets where we talk about the clones. We have talked about a potential inheritable vaccine and internal vaccine for plague for black-footed ferrets, where they would literally not need an injectable vaccine, and that would be it looks simple on paper, but it's a pretty complex process to make this happen. It would turn on and off at certain points in time. We know that black-footed ferrets, when we vaccinate them, have the ability, their bodies have the ability to fight off plague. So when we give them that vaccine, it does certain things in their F1 the immune system and turns need to fight. So their bodies have the ability. So if we can figure out how to turn that on genetically at the right times, at the right amounts, and be expressed, that could be a way that we would have these potentially genetically immune black-footed ferrets. Again, then releasing a GMO black-footed ferret out into the wild, is it a pure black-footed ferret? All that kind of thing. Those are great questions. And so I'm on these committees because I encourage this type of science, because we have to start somewhere. We have to get to the end somewhere. But I also come back to what my role is. And my role today is to keep black-footed ferrets alive on the ground right now, so that eventually, when those technologies are available, we have wild populations that it can be applied to. And so we're playing a short game and a long game.
Awesome. Another thing I also, most of us are probably aware, there's been a drought in the Western U.S. And it's interesting because your brain wanders to, wow, it's got to affect the caloric density and reproductive rates of prairie dogs, that these animals eat. And so how is this affecting the survival of the kits that are reintroduced? And how do you figure that all in? It's just
it did, and it does, and there's no doubt about it. These wide swings in climate now, we are in the middle of 2 years of drought now, and right now it's looking pretty bad for 2026 as well. We're going to expect lower prairie dog production, which is going to lead to lower black-footed ferret production. And so the way that we can try to buffer against this is to have large populations. If you only have 20 ferrets in your population, the probability of it blinking out is pretty high. If you have 200 ferrets in your ferret population, the probability is lower than 20 at least. And so that's really the buffer against this, is that we're going to have to ride these waves and make sure that we've got enough prairie dogs for black-footed ferrets through these peaks and troughs of climate variability. No doubt about it.
And my last question is, hopefully this one's just, again, I love technology. I work for a technology company, so I'm always interested in knowing how, like, we have new technology that allows for monitoring ferrets underground, like seeing what they're doing underground. And so what new things have we learned about them, like their social structures or behaviors or play, anything that we could only guess at because we didn't have these technologies?
There are some folks actually working on some collars that would track their movements below ground, kind of like on the different axes and whatnot. And they haven't gotten super detailed information yet. I would love to shrink down and crawl down in a burrow with the ferret and see what's going on.
Me too.
Or attach a camera to its head or whatever. But yeah, it's kind of maybe cruel.
Little GoPro on its head, send it down. Yeah.
Yeah. We certainly, and some of my colleagues and I have great spirited discussions, usually over beer, that we argue about what ferrets really do below ground and whatnot. But in the end, I think, and I covered this in before, I think they sleep a lot, they groom, they eat, and they don't bark. And so I think they do a lot of the similar things that our pet ferrets do. So I wouldn't be surprised about what we would find if we can ever get that technology going.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for your questions, and thank you, Travis. You are absolutely amazing with all the information you've brought us tonight. Thank you, Skyla, for helping with introductions. And don't forget that this has been recorded and it will be on our YouTube channel so that you can go back and watch it again, because I know I want to do that to re-listen and with not be as distracted. And Travis, do you have any closing remarks you want to share?
Thank you to the AFA. You guys are so wonderful. All the domestic ferret owners are so supportive of us, and I'm so grateful for all of you.
Thank you. We're very, very thankful that you came tonight and did this for us. And I think our tech people will be closing the meeting. So thanks so much for attending tonight. We will be offering another webinar on showing your ferret in the coming month or so. And again, don't forget that the recording will be on YouTube on our YouTube channel. So thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.